Hello everyone, thank you for attending my presentation. My name is Natalie Donohue and I am a doctoral researcher at the University of Leeds, and today my presentation will be on novice teacher support, interaction and cognition. Just to give you a brief outline of what the presentation is going to be, first of all I'm going to give you a brief overview of the theory and literature that justified my research project, and then I will go over the methods and the participants. And then for my findings, first I will present the positive and negative aspects of the different types of social support that was reported by the participants. And then I will go into a little bit more detail about two particular participants, James and Sean. That will be followed by the conclusions and then further questions and limitations. It's widely accepted in the literature now that the first year of teaching is one of the most difficult in a teacher's career, and it requires much adaptation, flexibility and learning in order to adjust to a new role. The first years are particularly formative time in terms of development as well, so both in terms of teacher cognition and a sense of teacher identity. Social support plays a large role in making novice teachers feel accepted into the workplace. So when they're transitioning from pre-service training to in-service teaching, feeling supported and welcomed is particularly important. And this is also important in terms of sustaining a commitment to the profession. I want to go into a little bit more depth about what language teacher cognition actually is here. So language teacher cognition is what teachers know, think and believe. And it's recognised that the complexity of teachers' mental lives affects classroom practices. But there's a social aspect to teacher cognition as well. It's socially constructed, so it comes as a consequence or outcome of interaction with others. So this might be management, other colleagues, students, of course. So not only is cognition displayed within the context where a teacher is teaching, but it's also developed in that particular context as well. Johnson adds that higher level human cognition in the individual has its origins in social life. So even though cognition is an internal thing, it's got both cognitive and social aspects to it. So now I want to consider in a bit more depth novice teachers and socialisation. Regular access to experienced and supportive teachers is really essential in making sure that novice teachers are able to get the advice and guidance that they need in order to navigate the first year of teaching. Supportive relationships between novice and experienced teachers can yield positive benefits and also increase the self-efficacy of novice teachers. Something that needs to be said though is that interaction with colleagues, it can be both a source of positivity and a source of negativity depending on what that interaction actually is and what it entails. And then also family and friends can be a support for novice teachers. But that being said, some novice teachers, they might want to kind of spare their family and not want to burden them with any of the challenges that they're going through. So that's something to bear in mind as well. So in my doctoral study, I'm particularly focused on novice EFL teachers, so English as a foreign language teachers. The ability to move abroad to another country in order to teach English is an attractive prospect for many prospective teachers. So after reading the literature and reviewing the literature in the area, there were three particular questions which stood out to me. So if novice teachers decide to move abroad to teach, from whom do they receive support? So if they don't have an established support network in that particular context, from whom do they receive support? I was curious as to the answer to this question. Additionally, is this support positive or negative in nature? And can this support influence novice teachers' cognition? These were the three questions that guided my doctoral study. Moving on to the study itself then, the criteria for recruiting participants consisted of three different things. So my participants had to have recently completed a CELTA course, so a short initial teacher training course. They also had to have no or very little teaching experience out with the CELTA course. And also my participants had to have started teaching abroad or were planning to teach abroad. So what I meant by that was that they were going to teach in a country which was not their own. I did a longitudinal study, a longitudinal qualitative study, which consisted of a number of cases. And for each case over one academic year, I would conduct 3 semi-structured interviews, monthly questionnaires, and weekly diary entries. So I had 5 participants in total. 2 of the participants were in the study for the entire academic year, their entire first year of teaching, and I had 3 participants which participated in the study for 6 months. So here's a table with the information of my participants. So I had 2 participants for the entire year, James and Sean, and then Molly, Rupert and Emma participated for 6 months in the study. James had a background in fine art, and he also had done a TEFL certificate before doing the CELTA. He ended up teaching in Italy across 3 schools, and he also did some private tutoring on the side. He wanted to go into EFL teaching because he wanted to teach in Italy whilst studying aspects of agriculture. He wanted to become an agricultural consultant eventually. He was fluent in Italian, and he did have a partner and an established friendship circle in Italy already. Sean, on the other hand, he went to Vietnam. He taught there in one school. He had no knowledge of Vietnamese, and he had never been to Vietnam before going there, so he didn't have an established friendship circle there. The reason he wanted to choose EFL teaching was because he wanted to travel and also save money for translation qualifications. So his background was Spanish, and he wanted to go into Spanish translation. Molly had done French and History of Art at university, and she ended up going to China to teach in one school. She chose EFL because she wanted to travel while teaching. She had never been to China either. She had no knowledge of Chinese, but something to note was that her partner was going to join her at the same school after 5 months. Rupert was a quantity surveyor in his previous career. He went to Poland and he worked freelance. He wasn't affiliated with any individual school. He wanted a sustainable career after relocating to Poland with his family. And he had very basic Polish skills. And in terms of support network, he moved to Poland with his family, so he had some support there already. And finally, Emma, she was a student recruiter at an American university. She also went to Vietnam and was teaching in one school. She wanted to move into EFL teaching because she wanted to move abroad and teach English. Same as Sean, she had never been to Vietnam and she didn't have any prior knowledge of Vietnamese. So this diagram here, it shows the nature of social support that was reported by my 5 participants. So it could be categorized into 3 different types of social support. So there was the director of studies or management, colleagues, and also family and friends. What I found in the entire study was that support or a lack thereof could be both positive and negative. And interaction with the director of studies or management and colleagues appeared to be able to influence novice teachers' cognition. So what I'm going to go and do now is go through each of these different types of social support and give the positives of this particular type and also the negatives. So one of the sources of social support that the novice teachers reported was from the director of studies of their particular school or schools or kind of management. So the support from this source was positive in that it can offer support and guidance based on the needs of novice teachers in order to help them adapt and develop. So both Molly and Emma found this. So Molly said after a period where she was struggling in particular, she said that she was glad it happened because it made her realise how stressed she'd been getting. Essentially, her DOS, her Director of Study, told her that she would have a lot of support to plan the lessons that she was covering this week. So the Director of Studies noticed that she was stressed and struggling with a particular aspect of teaching and gave her support so that she could adapt and develop herself. DOSs can also, and management, can also provide advice, suggestions and help if necessary. So that was reported by James and Sean. And they can also be sometimes the main point of reference for novice teachers. So Rupert was freelance. He kind of worked across a number of different schools. So he didn't have a set place to work. He didn't have any regular colleagues. So the Director of Studies in each school was Rupert's main point of reference for support in terms of the workplace. If we consider the negative side of support or lack of support from Directors of Studies or management, unhelpful DOSs can leave novice teachers feeling isolated. So particularly if they aren't affiliated with any particular school. So this is in the case of Robert. He didn't have a fixed school. He was teaching across a number of them, and some of the DOSs in his schools were very unhelpful, and Rupert said that this made him feel quite isolated in his job. Lack of feedback on teaching and development from the DOS can also be quite frustrating, and that's something that Sean reported. And interestingly, DOSs, they can sometimes impose expectations on novice teachers which clash with their own teacher beliefs, and Rupert reported this, and it constrained his creativity and adaptability in the classroom. So Rupert said the DOS's response to these comments was to ask me to refrain from introducing authentic texts of any kind to the class and stick rigidly to the course book. So he tried to bring in an authentic text to one of his classes. The students commented upon it to the DOS, and the DOS in response asked him not to do this. So this clashed with Rupert's own beliefs and style of teaching, but because the DOS was his only source of workplace support, he went along with what they said. Moving on to the second category of social support reported, this was colleagues, and in terms of the positive side of this support, having experienced colleagues to ask for advice, support and help can benefit novice teachers, and it is also desirable for them as well. So this was reported by all of the novice teacher participants. Positive feedback from experienced teachers can help boost the confidence of novice teachers. So both Emma and Molly reported this. Emma was saying that her supervisors really believed in her and they wanted her to do better, and they gave her a lot of encouragement to continue teaching and developing. Interactions with colleagues can also influence novice teachers' thinking about teaching. So here's an example from Sean. When he first started teaching, he moved to Vietnam because he wanted to travel while teaching and saving money. His original thought was, let me just find it. He did want people to learn, but if they didn't, he wouldn't really be overly fussed. And then after interacting with his colleagues and listening to them and listening to their concerns about student learning, he realised, oh wait, I should be thinking about this way, that I should be thinking this way as well. So after that, he reflected on his own thinking and he changed his thinking, and he actually felt guilty for harbouring those initial beliefs about teaching. So that influenced how he thought about teaching and his students' learning. In terms of the negative side of support from colleagues or lack of support from colleagues, both Rupert and James reported that without colleagues to share experiences and advice, they felt isolated. So James as well worked across a couple of schools, and in some of these schools he wasn't able to build a relationship with colleagues or get any advice from them. And then Rupert said that he worked largely on his own. The language barrier was a problem, but he also found the local teachers rather distant or standoffish. So he really struggled not having a source of support in the form of colleagues in his first year. Interestingly, James observed his colleagues and he saw them not being invested in their own teaching or professional development, and after observing this, it kind of shifted James's thinking about his own engagement with teaching. So he was essentially aiming for mediocrity. He admitted this himself. He did have conflicting feelings about this. He felt guilty for feeling this way, but watching his colleagues put in the bare minimum, he was less inclined to do much more than that himself. Kind of along similar lines, a negative atmosphere in the workplace amongst colleagues can also affect novice teachers' moods. So this affected Sean as well as James. The novice teacher participants also did report family and friends as being a positive source of social support. So family and friends can help novice teachers unwind. Sean said that having two housemates from America and having Thanksgiving dinner with them was a really nice experience because it reminded him of being home with family and friends. Molly also relied quite heavily on her family and her boyfriend. They were able to offer her support and sympathy during times in which she was struggling in her first year. On the other hand, though, novice teachers might be apprehensive about sharing the daily stresses with their partners, their family or friends for fear of straining personal relationships. So this was in the case of James in particular. So he had a girlfriend in Italy, he lived with her, but he was definitely apprehensive about sharing all of his struggles with her because he didn't want to strain their relationship. Also, James and Sean reported that their family and friends don't necessarily understand what they're going through as novice teachers and also as teachers who are living in a different context. So they sometimes avoided talking to their family and friends about struggles because they just wouldn't be able to understand. It can also be difficult for novice teachers to make friends in a new country. So James found this when he initially moved to Italy. And also Rupert found this as well, particularly because he didn't speak very much Polish. He found it difficult to establish a friendship base, and he reported that this led to further isolation for him as well. So James added that, you know, when you're moving to a new place, it does take time to build up a friendship network. So what I'd like to do now is take a little bit of a closer look at two particular instances from participants relating to social support. So something that was evident in James's experience was the clash between expectations and reality. So before he went out to Italy to teach, he was really looking forward to teaching being quite a social job. So he had come from a fairly isolated job and he was looking forward to the interaction with people. And he had the belief that people who teach do it because they enjoy sharing knowledge and the social environment enjoy sharing knowledge with other people. When he did actually get to Italy and start teaching, he found that this wasn't necessarily the case. So at the 6-month mark, he reported this, and he actually said that his teaching job, he felt quite isolated in it. And this was in his second interview at the 6-month mark. He was actually quite grateful for having me as a researcher, as someone for him to talk to and share his experiences in teaching with, because he didn't have that from colleagues. There was also another bit of a clash between his expectations and reality when it came to his colleagues. So the CELTA training course, he thought, over-prepared him for a very idealistic teaching environment. He thought that the teachers would be very diligent and passionate about what they're doing, that they would be well resourced, and he would have colleagues who were interested in their job and are professional, not only for turning up punctually, but actually for the job itself, so a sense of professionalism. When he got to Italy and he started teaching, he found himself becoming quite cynical because he saw that the other teachers in his workplace, they were just doing the bare minimum. And he says himself that he's just above that, he hoped, but he's not far from it. So this was something that he mentioned throughout his first year experience, the clash between his expectations of colleagues and what the actual reality was in the workplace, and this did affect how he approached his own teaching. Sean also had an interesting experience when it comes to social support, and actually he found that when he moved to his school, there was very little limited support that he could access. So when, after 2 months of being in that institution, when another few teachers joined, a few new teachers, he was quite happy about that because he had someone or people to share that similar experience with. And he was hoping that that would get rid of some of the negativity that he found in his workplace among the colleagues. At about the 6-month mark, he started reporting in his questionnaires and diary entries that he himself was put himself forward as a source of social support for new teachers. So any new teacher who was coming in, he would go over to them and say, you can observe me if you want. You might learn something, you might see something I'm doing wrong, and you can tell me about it. So that kind of mutual relationship, kind of helping him develop professionally, and helping the new teacher potentially develop professionally as well. So he was offering himself as a source of social support after recognising that that just wasn't available in his workplace. And this was repeated throughout his data. He would try and be extra kind of helpful to any new teacher that came in. And then at the 9-month mark as well, he said that a teacher wanted to work with him more because he believed that he could learn a lot from Sean. In summary then, there are a few things that I think can be taken away from this study. So it seems like a lack of social support can leave novice teachers feeling isolated and unable to ask for advice and guidance. And this could be a real problem when they're in this formative development stage. They need access to advice and support from more experienced colleagues. Interestingly, supportive or unsupportive directors of studies, they had a direct influence in whether the novice teacher felt accepted into the workplace or whether they felt isolated. Mentoring or informal support and advice from experienced teachers can help novice teachers feel more confident and cope better with challenges, as well as potentially helping them adapt and develop themselves as teachers. Interaction with colleagues can influence novice teachers' cognition positively. So Sean, he was wanting to develop, and hearing his colleagues talk about kind of their concerns about student learning, this made Sean change his own thoughts about student learning and his attitude towards it. But interaction with colleagues can also potentially negatively influence novice teachers' cognition. So James found this when he observed his colleagues doing the bare minimum. It also kind of changed his own approach to teaching, and he started putting less effort into his lessons. And finally, access to family and friends nearby could help counter some of the stresses of teaching, but on the other hand, family and friends, they're not necessarily able to fully understand the challenges that the novice teachers were facing, and they might not necessarily be able to offer valuable advice for them. So the findings of the study did raise some further questions. So how can novice EFL teachers be supported if they don't have access to in-service support? So this was reported to some extent by all of the participants. They didn't necessarily have consistent access to support from colleagues or management, directors of studies. So how can novice teachers be supported in this workplace environment? And then, should novice teachers be made aware of the significance of support networks before moving abroad to teach? So if the social support is not available in the particular workplace, is that something that students or novice teachers, is that something that they should be made aware of during their teacher training so they understand the importance of social support before they take a teaching job? So these are interesting questions for future research. Something that needs to be noted is the limitation. I had a very small size of novice teachers who were teaching abroad. They were all actually native speakers, so this is not necessarily representative of EFL teachers in general, and that needs to be borne in mind. And here are my references. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I welcome any questions that you have, and this is my email address here, so please feel free to get in contact. Thank you very much.